You've been very kind, thank you, and I will now shift right away into the panel. So let me just take out my new set of notes. So we're going to have a panel discussion, and the panel really is around Trinidad and Tobago's gas economy, challenges and opportunities. We are very fortunate. We have 4 tremendous panelists. We have Norman Christie, who is the regional chairman of bpTT, and of course a member of the board of the Energy Chamber. We have Charles Percy, who is a former chairman of the Energy Chamber and of course the head of Methanex. We have, I'm just looking around to make sure I find the people that we have. There you are, you can't hide from me. We have Roger Packer, who is of course also a former chairman of the Energy Chamber and the managing director of Tucker Energy Services. And we have Derek Hudson, who has recently returned to Trinidad to head Shell's business here in Trinidad and Tobago, and is now also a member of the Energy Chamber board. So I would like to ask these 4 gentlemen to join me on stage to take a seat for the panel conversation. Please. Little technical thing, they're all going to be mic'd up. I need to be mic'd.
But there's nothing to say after Vince does both. Vince, you nothing else to say. Where he's in the middle? Where is he? Settle. It's non-existent. It's non-existent, unfortunately.
Who wants water?
Huh? No, you better pour one thing, because you could never tell. It's non-existent. I happen to be in Tobago, that's where my golf clubs are.
Is this on? Yes, yeah. It is. Okay. So thank you all, and thanks again to the panel. You know, I don't think I've had the privilege of sitting on a panel like this before. You know, 2 former chairmen of the Energy Chamber and the 2 leaders of the 2 most significant, largest energy upstream companies in Trinidad and Tobago. So thank you all very much. Just a couple of things before we start. In the spirit of learning from previous debates, I will ask that none of you stalk the other speaker. So if you could stay in your seat, this will be very helpful. And any past activities are not going to form part of this conversation. So with those very important rules, I think we can get started. And maybe I can just ask each of the panelists to just make a quick, comment, any thought they'd like to add with regards to, the Trinidad and Tobago gas economy, its challenges and opportunities. And we didn't toss, for who would go first. So maybe it's easier, Norman. How about if we start with you? Is that okay?
Sounds good.
Good.
And I'll keep my comments brief. I'm really interested in hearing questions as you are. I think it's great to have this forum where we can actually field questions from the audience, and that's something that I'm really looking forward to. But as we talk about the gas industry, I want to emphasize the optimism, first of all, that you exhibited in your speech. It is challenging times, but I remain an optimist. And what I think our focus should be on primarily is about how, as an entire industry, we stay competitive. So if I had to start with a key point, it is the fact that all around us, others are getting their house in order. And we need to realize that it is extremely competitive outside. people talk about shale, and just as one kind of marker, it's amazing what's happening with the cost of supply of gas in the U.S. from these shale producers. It continues to go lower and lower and lower. And since I don't view the risk for Trinidad as the volume risk to sell, there is this risk though about your cost versus somebody else's cost for gas going into the market. So we have to have our collective eyes on competitiveness, and that involves lots of things which I'm sure we'll talk about. So that's one thing. And then the second thing for me is really around a mindset. In the face of challenges, we could have this mindset that things are running out. I heard a talk on the Ryder-Scott report, for example, recently. And then what tends to happen when you get into a mindset of things are running out is people think, well, I better quickly grab mine. And you have this race to the bottom instead of a race to the top. So I guess as a starter for the conversation, I would just highlight, again, the need for an intense focus on competitiveness and a mindset that speaks to actually raising ourselves to the top than one that will drive us to the bottom, partly because we might actually predict and act that it would happen.
Thank you.
I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Norman. Roger.
Thanks, Vince. The energy services sector over the past 10 years has grown to be almost an amazing 400-odd companies that service both the upstream, midstream, and downstream sector. And we feel the pain of our customers in this price environment, and we feel like we've come so far. We've all contributed in our own way to sort of keeping the energy sector going. The Minister of Finance, in his budget speech, mentioned that the energy services sector had shrunk by 25%, which is a phenomenal number. So it is tough times, it is difficult times out there, but I think the energy services sector has the staying power. We have gone through significant cost-cutting, across our industry. We've reduced our prices. I don't think there's anybody in the energy service sector that hasn't reduced their prices. But I think, what will keep us going with these lower prices is volume of activity. And where the real difficulty comes into being is if we don't have sustained activity in the upstream, midstream, and downstream, then it could be dangerous for all of us to survive if on top of very low prices, we also have very low activity. Yeah. And that's a challenge we face. And we've come through challenges like this in the past, and I am confident that as an industry, we can survive. And once, of course, the activity levels remain up, we can survive and hopefully be stronger for it at the end of the day.
Thank you very much, Roger. Charles.
Thanks, Vince, and thanks to the Chamber for having this opportunity. I think I want to congratulate you for the broad perspective in which you opened the session in your speech. I think you covered most of the issues at a very high level, and that certainly tees up what we're going to do here. From the downstream perspective, the issue has been that for the entire life of the downstream, up until 2011, shortage of gas supply has never been an issue. Never. The petrochemical industry, both the ammonia and the methanol and urea, have always been operating on commodity cycles that are short wavelength cycles, all right? Especially the ammonia, which is actually seasonal. So we've been accustomed to trying to manage on the margin very well, but never to fight managing on the margin with short gas as well. So since 2011 to now, we've had this progressive decline, 5%, 10%, 15%, even 20% decline on our daily contract quantities in an environment where it's always hope that it will improve. I think you have a situation now where some of the downstream companies are at their wits' end of, can we get out of this? Is this thing improving? And is the hope that we've been putting in the industry that it will recover, is that hope going to come alive eventually? So we could always look back and say, okay, BG had some challenges and therefore they didn't succeed as we expected. But at the end of the day, we are 15 to 20% short in a situation where market prices are at the lowest they've been in a long, long time. All right, the whole shale gas phenomena, we know about that. All right. The issue, however, is that we sell most of our product to the Atlantic Basin. And there is where the pressure is coming from shale in North America. And then if you're following what is happening with shale, shale is going very quickly to Argentina. And therefore, the entire basin is going to be snuffed with low-cost gas in a situation where we have to compete. So I agree with you wholeheartedly that our competitive advantage and our agility has to be our competitive advantage. How do we move forward? We got to recognize all the strengths that we have under us and maximize them in order to move forward. And I think the issue for me has been the issue of decisioning. We've been sitting on a gas master plan for which we all consulted on, for which a submission has been done. And then only recently we've been asked to sit again on a secondary review of that. And I know that a paper has been presented to the government, but when? When will we have that? When will we have a clear decision around a direction on the energy policy? Because I think everybody is in stalemate. All right, moving plant, and I don't want to sound, sensational. Moving plant is not as difficult as it used to be. It is not. We have examples of how easy it is to move it. Please, let us not as an industry allow ourselves to get to the place where plants are leaving our shores. We have an opportunity to act. Please, let's do it. I think we could do it.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much, Charles. Derek?
Thank you, Mr. President. A few things. One is that we referred to the situation that we were in, which began in about 2014. I think this was, in fact, there was a precursor to this in the 2008 financial crisis, which changed the way the world looked at itself and behaved. Then we got to 2014, and we could describe it as lower for longer, or however we wish to describe it, but it is an experience that regardless of how long you've been in this business, is not one that many of us have come across before. The response to that is actually quite critical for all energy-producing countries. There's a question of cost. And what we need to do going forward is to ensure that our cost base is resilient regardless of fluctuation in energy prices. And that is something that we have not done quite well in the past. Secondly, there's a question of competitiveness, which has been made here. That conversation has been going on for quite a long time. And maybe it is unfortunate that the question of competitiveness faces us head-on when we're in a crisis. But sometimes out of crisis, we can arrive at a good position. So as a result, if it gets up all the relevant stakeholders, the energy companies, the service providers, the government, and people of Trinidad and Tobago, in a very constructive conversation about how we make our energy industry competitive to deal with what is happening on a global scale, we would make a very important turning point with respect to how we have done business previously. And just one final perspective before you open it up to the audience. Our business is to produce gas. We have never been enamored by the fact over the last couple of years that both the petrochemical industry and the LNG industry at present is short of gas. And seeing that that is our business, one has to ask the question as to why we arrived at that situation. Any effort to try to point fingers at someone else is a grave error. We must all look within ourselves, each and every one of the relevant stakeholders involved, to seriously reconsider what could have been done different to take us out of this position. So if I take the upstream position, and we have been debating about competitiveness for quite a long time, clearly we have to say that somewhere along the line our influencing strategy was not as effective as it should be, so that things could have changed before we arrived as where it is today. But this is where we are at, and I think spending too much time looking backwards as to what it is got us here is not really going to be a value-adding exercise at this point in time. We need to carefully think through about how we go forward, and this is going to require a completely different way of how we do business here in Trinidad and Tobago. And we have to be absolutely certain that everybody here on this panel, everybody here in this room, they are actually prepared to do it differently. Because if you're expecting more of the same, then we're not going to be heading in the right direction.
Thank you very, very much, Derek, and thanks to all of the panelists for those opening remarks. We've heard some very common themes, and all interlinked themes, to be quite honest. Let me just, one of the things that we talk about a lot, and I think it has a relevance to this conversation here, because we talk about the oil markets a lot. What could one of you bring a perspective on what's happening in the global gas markets? Because I think that could help us then filter that conversation down into the Trinidad and Tobago gas market. And I know Charles picked a little bit on it with shale, Norman picked a little bit on it with shale as well, and Derek talked about kind of some of the things that got us here. So maybe just a comment about what's happening in the global markets for gas and how it impacts us here. And I would add petrochemicals to that as well. I don't know if anybody wants to take that.
Yeah, well, I think we can all opine. I'll just kick it off. So one definite game changer we've touched on already, which is shale. And I pick on shale because shale is a great demonstration of a lot of a commodity coming onto the market and expectations that a lot of that commodity will come onto the market in an area where you used to sell your commodity. So it's a game changer for multiple reasons, but that's clearly one. Related to shale and related to this, if you will, excess supply is what's happened with prices, and that's important in terms of the gas market. So we had this long-running arbitrage going, which many people benefited from, including ourselves, where you had Asian prices really high, NBP or Europe relatively high, and Henry Hub was lower. And so you had this arbitrage you'd play. If you were in the LNG business, for example, that was great, that you can take a vessel and send it somewhere else. You get higher prices in Asia, and in South America we're getting higher prices as well. That arbitrage is all but gone. So that's another significant issue. The really high prices in the Far East, South America, are not there anymore. Those prices have come down. And what you're seeing increasingly is the difference between these different regions is really more about shipping or regas costs and the like that makes the distinction, not the built-in structural factors that led to that arbitrage. That's significant because obviously the money that we made from cargo diversions, which we heard about a lot several years ago, is just not there to the same extent currently. That's on the LNG side. Likewise, you've seen commodity collapse in general. So if you look to methanol or ammonia prices, while they stayed up longer than LNG prices did, they're also declining as well, which should be expected from an oversupply, just general economics. But here's the interesting thing going forward is that the oversupply is expected to continue for a little while yet. So if you take LNG again, there will be several LNG plants built over the next 18 months. By one calculation, on average, they won't get paced the way I describe it, but on average, it's like a plant every 6 weeks for about 18 months. That's a lot of plants, starting first in Australia, then moving to the US. So you will have a lot of plants coming on in the near to midterm, which will exacerbate the oversupply problem. But the health of the industry needs to be described, though, in a much longer term, because you will continue to have population growth. You will still continue to have concerns about climate change, if we get to that topic when people ask questions. And what it means is that the demand for the product called gas in the long term is going to stay strong. So it's still a good business to be in, just based on fundamentals. But you're going to have to ride out a storm for the factors that I just described succinctly. It's much more complicated than that, but I think people would get the picture, largely around supply and demand. Those you will have to work through for the next few years, because the supply-demand story is not going to change dramatically for the better. You will have strengthening in prices as we're seeing now, based on seasonality, for example. So it's not like you won't see ups and downs. That's the nature of our business. But the high prices that we got used to years ago, sometimes over $15 per MMBTU, we shouldn't be banking on that. And Derek made a great point. We shouldn't be banking on that as a basis for planning our business, because the fundamentals don't support that. Yeah. But just as a starter.
Charles, your thoughts on the petrochemical side of that?
Right. So let me kind of talk methanol a little bit, because the same arbitrage that Norm talked about allowed for methanol to olefins to come into the picture. All right, so olefins usually came out of the naphtha stream. Methanol to olefins became an opportunity, which the methanol industry in China went after. China had coal, they chose to go from coal to olefins, and therefore that market. But once China started to get pressure around clean air, then you had to have a lot of imported methanol that came in to support that methanol to olefins. The issue, however, is that, well, methanol to olefins is one side. There's also methanol to energy, which is putting methanol into the fuel mix in China. Once you started to enter the fuel mix, you are then dependent on the price of oil. So that pulled the whole situation down. So whereas the arbitrage for methanol in the Atlantic basin as against the Pacific basin existed, that has now died out because oil has now depressed. Naphtha is back in the conversation, and the whole situation has balanced. So the lower for longer situation is not only with oil and gas, it is also with the petrochemicals, because they are now coming back. That arbitrage that was there is gone, and we're now back in the swinging with oil type situation.
I just had one comment here, a couple comments, Vincent. Following on from the Norman's theme, we are in a perfect storm. None of us would have envisaged a few years ago the disconnect now that we see in the Far East between oil and gas prices, which have come to pass. This, of course, is exacerbated by the fact that growth projections in the Far East, whether China or India, have not been as robust as we predicted. And, diplomatic outcomes, for example, like bringing Iran onto the market and the OPEC response to this, and that has facilitated over the last couple of months, have also contributed to the situation that we're in today. But there's one other thing that both globally and of course here in Trinidad and Tobago we need to address, which is the introduction of new energies to our supply base. Over the last couple of years, the amount of research spent on new energies has surpassed what we have done for oil and gas. And they're now at a place where the unit cost of development for these things are now beginning to compete with what was the standard energy supply. You even have discussions now. I was quite pleased to see as I was coming from London last week in the British Airways magazine that islands like Nevis are talking about becoming self-sufficient based on geothermal energy. It's something, again, that few of us would think that the cost per unit would be such that it could compete, even with the reduction in oil prices for their fuel oil imports. And that is how rapidly it has evolved. And as upstream companies and others, we are all looking at it. And Trinidad and Tobago has to look, we have to look at it to see where we are going and how that mix will then be part of our energy picture going forward. Because at the end of the day, there's actually place for all of it. But it has to be thought out now for the future. And we're not talking 2020, we're talking 2030 and beyond.
Thank you. So, and I'll just sort of fair warning, I'll be turning to the audience for a question or two in a short while, so if you could put your thoughts together on that. So, if you've talked about the global environment being in a perfect storm, it's sort of the perfect storm in Trinidad and Tobago in that regard. I mean, we've heard shale, large, depressing prices on gas, because they're getting more and more efficient all the time. The end user of the gas in the lower for longer environment, renewables as a real threat now, in terms of a disruptive threat, not just a consequential threat, a disruptive threat. What can Trinidad do in terms of our industry here to compete? What do we need to do to be able to compete and to be able to at least keep what we have, far less grow? And I'll just open that up to the panel.
Could I just add one more and before somebody else starts the response there? Because it's an important point. Along with renewables, you had mentioned technology in your talk.
Yes.
On the demand side, things like electric cars, for example, just as an example of another disruption. So technology as a disruptor is also a key phenomenon that needs to be considered in the whole mix of fuels going forward. That's also a major phenomenon.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
but I'll let somebody start the response to your direct question first.
What do we need to do?
What do we need to do?
What are the things that we can do?
I mean, I am a big fan of simplifying things because it's sometimes the easiest way to go forward. But at the end of the day, capital will be attracted to places where the unit cost is lowest. End of story. And therefore, we have to continue to improve our competitive edge, whether it is in terms of the fiscal regime that we operate under, and it is how we look at our cost base, the way we do business, the way we collaborate, all of us in the upstream, Royal Dutch Shell, BP, BHP, EOG, the way we collaborate amongst ourselves, the way we collaborate with the midstream players, the way we collaborate with the service industry. It is all part and parcel in a collective fashion so that we become more competitive. Okay? And of course, let me say it to that. The answer to that is not straightforward. But if we don't put our heads together and address that in a very rapid fashion, we'll be heading nowhere very fast.
Let me just kind of comment on the back of that. At the end of the day, the molecules that we have in country could be taken out of the ground as efficiently as we can based on what we have. If it is deep, it is going to cost X dollars to bring it to the surface. If it is shallow, and if it is not there, it just ain't there. Good. So I think Derek is right. We need to be as efficient and as productive as we can with what we have to get out of the ground. But there is a bigger picture. There is a global stage We are a small island state, and we are an open economy, and therefore we have to compete globally on all the things that we do. So the competitive advantage that we have to ensure that we know it and that we fine-tune it. So productivity in the country is at an all-time low. Right? In the face of all that is going on, we know where productivity is. That is not an easy challenge for any one of us here. It is a national challenge. So we have to go after that. All right? So getting the productivity right, and that is productivity at the individual level, at the firm level, at the governmental level. It is throughout the system. Right? There is just too much institutional inertia to get anything done in this kind of environment. And that starts with, okay, so the price is the price that we take it out of the ground at, but we got to move it through the value chain. Additionally, we have built up a lot of expertise after 100 years of oil and gas. Well, oil and then 50 or 60 years of gas. That expertise is resident in country, and we can use it to diversify. We can. But somehow or the other, we kind of look down this energy channel and figure that's it. I always use the example of Singapore because they have no molecules. Yet they have a petrochemical industry that is 10 times the size of ours. They buy on the open market and they process and make on the margin, irrespective of the price that is going on outside there. But they have an efficient and productive system to make that happen. We have the learnings over 100 years. We got to use it and recognize that we can be as productive as they are. If we change that mindset, it's not only about the molecule that we have, but it's also about the learnings and experiences and that we also have earned over the years to make us go forward. Right? So I will just kind of position it there for now.
Thank you, Charles. Roger.
Vince, what can we do differently? And sometimes when you find yourself in a position like this, there's 2 points I want to make. One is we go back to basics. You know, just this month I started my career on October 8th, 1976. So I am 40 years in the industry.
Oh.
And I remembered in my early days working in the teak, Saman and Poi fields. And a well would go off production, and the engineers would, in fact, around about your time when you were early days.
I was 12 at the time. I was 12.
I was beginning to worry.
A well would go off production on a Wednesday morning, and the engineers would write up a program by after lunch. And the Wednesday evening, they called the service company, and we prepared all the equipment. We went offshore the following morning. The equipment was already offshore, and we were back home in 2 days. That process of delivering that well back onto production is 4 days. Today it's 4 months. Today it's 4 months. And instead of there being 3 steps to getting your well back on production, there is 35 steps. And each one of those 35 steps is huge cost to you, the customer. So from me looking from the service company perspective, we can't just, everybody feels they have to add another step in what it takes to get something done. And I'm saying we need to go back to basics. So that's one. And the second thing that I want to be able to say is that we have, over this 100 years we've been in the energy sector, we've been able to train not only a huge amount of Trinidadians that work all over the world, we've been able to develop 300 or 400 service companies within the local sector. The Trinidadians that have gone overseas have done exceptionally well and are well respected and admired in their fields. And when I look today, 60 or 70% of that huge workforce of Trinidadians that were leaders in their field all over the world are back at home, either unemployed or underemployed. So I am saying we need to harness these resources. We talk from a productivity point of view, and these people have worked in all parts of the world, and if they're not productive in that part of the world, they get dispatched back home. So I'm saying we need to turn inwards and say, we know we have the capabilities. We know some of the most successful projects that have been done in Trinidad and Tobago and delivered on time, on budget, have been done by Trinidadians and Trinidad companies, and we have the records to show it. And I'm just saying we need to get back to basics. You know, this is time charity begins at home, and we need to work together. We know we've already seen the effects of, cutting costs to make things work, but let's get back to doing things how we did them in the past and ask ourselves the question, does this add value? So when we add a step to something, sit down and say, now what value does that give us? And if we can't come up internally and say this adds value, then we don't need to be doing that extra step.
Thank you. Thank you, Roger.
Well, let me,
Norman.
the value of going last is that all these smart people give the answer, and you just have to add a little bit. But I'd like to add two things. So we've heard cost, collaboration, productivity, actually paying attention to workflow and all of those things extremely important. We don't talk a lot about technology, but in this environment, I think that's extremely important. So certainly companies like mine, I'm sure all of yours, realize that one of the ways you're going to stay competitive at a low price environment is to use technology to get you to the right cost that you need. So as an industry, we really need to be giving explicit thought to how technology is being employed, because again, we won't compete against those people who are using the best technology. And so that's one item I'd add. And then the second one is a bit more esoteric, but it's absolutely required thinking for our industry, because in the gas business, it's a value chain. So you get a pie created by the volume you sell and the price that you get. Then comes the interesting task of dividing up that pie amongst all of these players in the value chain. And if that divvying up of the pie isn't done correctly, somebody's going to be disincentivized, and the investments required won't occur, and then essentially what you start getting is a shrinking pie, not an expanding pie. We've talked about the gas master plan, for example. One of the issues that's meant to address is to help with issues like those. So it was good to hear the Honorable Minister of Energy in her parliamentary remarks saying they now have a recommendation. I think that's a big step. And of course, now we need to get to that being implemented. But this whole issue of the gas value chain, getting clear on where risks reside and where returns should commensurately reside, is a big thing. So to make that more concrete, let's take one issue, for example. We've long talked about the role of NGC and the role that NGC plays in the value chain. NGC plays a vital role and obviously should be rewarded based on the role they play. But if that is not a reward commensurate with the risk, then you will have distorted returns in the value chain, and again, it won't grow, just as one example. So along with the cost, productivity, and all those items, because we're dealing with a gas value chain, you have to pay attention to how does this whole chain work together so that all the participants, including service companies, all participants are actually making a return commensurate with their risk, so they will stay in the game, keep investing and expanding the pie.
Thank you. I think we've heard some really important things here that, and it almost sounds like we have to get each one of them right. In this, to borrow the analogy again, in this perfect storm that we're in. It's the way for us to stay competitive. Audience, if we can have a question, if you can get to I think there are microphones around. If you can state your name and your affiliation, and if you want the question to be posed to the entire panel, or if you prefer to direct it to one of the panelists. And I'm just the moderator.
Hello. My name is John Carrington. I'm with Worsley Trinidad Limited. I've heard the panel, an esteemed panel, discuss things. I've heard crisis. I've heard somebody talk about plants that are easy to move. I've heard low gas supplies since 2011. I've heard low investment. I think the panel knows exactly what the issues are, and knows what the solutions need to be. I think the people in this room are also familiar with all the issues and all the solutions, but I think the government and the general population is ignorant of the crisis that we face and the impact it's going to have on their lives if it continues. And I'm wondering if the chamber can develop some kind of lobby group to make sure that the population understand the crisis. And it seems that after ArcelorMittal left, everything was a big hoorah, and then everything died down again, and it's business as usual. We have productivity issues. Is the population aware of the impact and how bad we are with productivity? We say Petrotrin is another one. I keep hearing about ads. Somebody's advertising Petrotrin and the impact and everything that's so good about Petrotrin. But Petrotrin, I understand, is a burden on the Treasury. Is that so or not? So these are comments for the panel. Please comment as you like.
Panel?
Comment as you like. I certainly agree with you that we've been talking this for, I met a guy on Monday, went to Phoenix Park, and he said to me, Charles, I come to these energy chamber conferences every year and I hear the same thing over and over, but we don't seem to be moving forward at all. And exactly the same sentiments from you, sir, that, it seems as though we're not moving forward. What you are asking is that the chamber now be that engine that develops a momentum, a lobby in the country, that everybody gets on board as and rise up against the government that might not be hearing or might provide answers for them. Maybe they don't have the answers. So I don't see any reason why not. I mean, certainly I have been at the forefront for this for a long while, and certainly would love to continue to do that. But everybody needs to, to get into the picture to make it something. I think we can do it, but the chamber can take the ball and start moving with it, and everybody puts their 2 cents into it to make it into a snowball that works. I see him going back to the mic. Yes, sir.
I agree with you 100%. And maybe if the Energy Chamber was to enlighten the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber and all the other business organizations as to the gravity of the situation, that would also help to have a collective voice. But I certainly am happy that you understand and that everybody in this room understands the impact. As I say, it needs to be put out there, and it needs to be put out there in a strong manner.
Yeah. Derek, you were going to say something? I don't want to draw you in if this is not what you wanted. I thought I heard makings of a comment.
The fact that you and Roger worked 45 years ago.
I was 12 years old. I started young.
Don't mean that you should actually take the option to draw me in as you like, but having done so, I will respond accordingly. The comments made are valid. The question which I struggle with, and Charles and Roger would, I think, admit this, in that in their time as head of the Energy Chamber, they attempted to do this. They attempted to bring the situation to the fore, and they went out to quite a few people with respect to what the situation was at that point in time. Norman and yourself are fully aware of the conversations that we've had for years. One of the very unique things about being out of it for some time, as I have been, and for the last 4 years, is you come back in and you say to yourself, crikey, I must have just gone to sleep and got up, and I'm in the same place. Yeah. What I'm trying not to do, however, Mr. Carrington, is spend too much time right now debating why it got us here, as opposed to thinking what it is that we have to do differently, how we can learn from the past, and take ownership of it, because I will suggest put one data point in the room. Maybe we never resolved it before because everybody sits down and says, you need to fix it, as opposed to we need to fix it. And if we just start from that of taking ownership of the problem, then maybe as a chamber, as members of the energy industry, whether upstream or otherwise, we will start a different dialogue about this problem. And final thing on that point is, as per usual in life, until the crisis hits you head on, then you react. And for some of us who have been in the conversation that the crisis is coming, we now have to hold our tongue and say, and don't say, I didn't want to say that I told you so, but.
Yep. Can I just add to that?
Yeah, go last, and please. Don't ask me any more questions.
Yeah, I guess I might not be last here. But there is a penchant. I just want to build on the excellent question. There's a penchant. I wouldn't say that it is unique to Trinidad and Tobago, but sometimes it just, I'm the sole non-national up here, although I've been adopted in a certain way.
Sure. Norman, not from here?
There is a penchant that I just want, if we're going to have a real conversation, we have to be transparent about. We have this strong penchant to run right up to the precipice and almost dangle our leg over to see if disaster will come before action. Yeah. And my worry is, one of these times, we'll do more than dangle. So I'll give you an example to build on the comment that you made about how long we've been in the conversations. So one of the challenges you have when you talk about things and speak out is it easily becomes political. And most of us, I know our organizations, we're very apolitical. But it's easy for it to be pulled into political fray, and then it's a fight against the government or the government of the day or whatever. And so sometimes you wonder, how do you weave your way through that? So I'm going to attempt to, I'm giving that as a kind of caveat to an attempt to weave through the obvious challenge. We've been talking about gas shortfalls for the longest while. We know one of the reasons why we're in the current shortfall is because of investments that were not made a few years ago. So I agree with Derek. We don't want to look back in a blame casting way. We want to look back to learn. One clear lesson is, if investments had been made 3-4 years ago, the extent of the shortfall that we have today would not be the case. And how do we know that for certainty? Well, because there are investments that were made later that are now coming on. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say, had you made those investments earlier, that gas would be showing up now, and the shortfall that you're in would not be the shortfall that you're in. So now we get to a situation where we could do exactly the same thing. 2 of the largest contracts in the country come up for renewal 2018. We all know the story. The NGC contract with BP and Train 1 contract comes up in 2018, which means that a person who's attempting to invest has uncertainty as to what's going to happen with no contracts, meaning new contracts have to be done. If you're going to invest for the gas to show up after 2018, and you don't have the basis for making the investment now, in 3 to 4 years, the gas will not be there. But we've been talking about that because I've been at several energy chambers now for several years before. Only now we've left it right up to the precipice. Why? Because if we're at 2016, and it takes you 3 years to engineer, build platforms, drill wells, but you can't make the decision in 2016, you know for a fact that the developments will not be there in 2019 because you haven't started. So it's like, here we go again, racing up to the precipice and testing the laws of physics, when we know we shouldn't be doing that. So without it being political, because it happens on both sides, one of the things that the industry needs to realize is that we are an industry with a long investment cycle, and it's not just what's right before your face that you need to worry about. It's what's 3 to 4 years down the line, and we have to get our house in order that long in advance to prevent the kind of issues that we are facing, like gas shortfalls.
Thank you. And we can stay in this conversation for quite a while, because I think there's a lot of very important things here. But I'm keen to try and get some other questions going. If we don't, we'll kind of come back to this one. Please, come to the microphone and just say who you are and who you're with.
Good evening. Trevor Sylvester Engineering. Now, I'm fully aware of where we are, and not sure where we are going, but certainly know where we are. One of the interesting things which came out today was the extent to which we've had some contraction, particularly in the service sector. Gas, oil, the energy sector, we know we haven't been doing a lot of diversification. But if I take some examples from the other Caribbean islands, and I happen to be involved in both banking and insurance in the other islands, and recognize that one of the things that has happened over the years, particularly coming out of the Clico debacle, is that legislation, etc., being put in place. I've had the opportunity to review a lot of those comments, and it's been a challenge to get them implemented, simply because stakeholders want this, stakeholders want that. It's very difficult to get a whole group of people to agree on anything, and particularly in the Eastern Caribbean, where we have a central bank that is literally oversees several islands with different sovereign nations. Now, one of the things, however, that has come out of that is the question of consolidation, looking at consolidating the financial institutions, consolidating the insurance companies. Now, and I'm thinking as I'm sitting there, based on what Roger mentioned, if we are shrinking, there's also the opportunity of charity begins at home. And we know this is always a problem in the Caribbean. There's just none at home. Right? We're always looking outward. We have tried over the years, with and a couple other people, to try to create some element of consolidation in the service sector so as to be able to present a more unified front, particularly for the multinational companies. So that the question has always been, well, you're too small to do this, you're too small to do that. And the consequence, we have had to allow the inflow of talent, right? Because, yes, I hear that we have a lot of talent, but yet we're always importing talent, right, for one reason or the other. The question, and for the panel, not necessarily for Roger, is do you see that maybe what we ought to be looking at as part of the local development and the local content aspect is look at consolidation of a lot of these companies. Because we've got a lot of little, this one doing that, the other one's doing that, etc., but none are large enough to really take the bull by the horn, right? I mean, we suffer the same problem. I mean, a lot of the stuff we have to keep bringing someone in. So do you see as one of the potential things that we have, and particularly where things are declining, where there isn't a lot to go around? I mean, if you have to keep bidding for little bits and pieces, somebody's going to go out of business. So do you see as consolidation as being a potential roadway for us to improve on, one, the efficiencies, and certainly to ensure that we stay in business locally, right, as opposed to going out of business and then the whole markets, the floodgates open again, and we're back to square one?
Thank you. Roger, I don't know if you want to.
Yes, I agree with that approach. I think, when you're in a time of need, I mean, like we've seen the oil and gas companies talking about ideas like sharing pipelines and sharing their infrastructure. And I think that sometimes, as the service sector, we lose projects because either we don't have the capacity as being one company, and we're missing some piece of the puzzle. There's a piece that we are missing. So we need to certainly look at those opportunities, because sometimes we just compete very strongly against one another, but a lot of times we are losing the business to foreign competition. So I certainly like that concept. We've got to be innovative and we've got to be real creative if we are to survive the next 2 or 3 years ahead of us. So we need to be talking about these options and also getting feedback from our customers as to if these options will allow us a better chance of being successful in our bids. But I think, any fresh ideas should be considered, and I think that's a good one.
Thank you. That does raise the question of, because we've talked about the fact that one of the things that we have to get really, really good at is our cost base, and the way the industry, certainly the upstream, has grown up, everybody sort of does their own thing. What is out there? What is possible for the upstream or the downstream, to do things in a different way that could impact the cost base, if we're sharing more, if we're managing things together in a different way? What is possible?
I think there are a lot of opportunities out there, Vincent. And I was, of course, chuckling to myself because, Royal Dutch Shell acquisition of BG from a global scale is the largest consolidation that just took place. But of course, the question was asked in a different context. Consolidation means quite a few different things. And I think there are opportunities for us to share services, for us to do things more efficiently in the way we integrate with the service providers. But of course, there's a very tricky balance to maintain here, because you also don't want to get to the point where it becomes non-competitive. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And people start to control the market. So that balance is something that, all of us have to be in conversation as to how we do it while retaining, because we can't speak about wanting the energy environment in Trinidad and Tobago to be more competitive, and then we introduce ways of working that are non-competitive. Mm-hmm. Okay? And therefore, with consolidation, we have to ensure that consolidation introduces competitiveness, and not takes away from it. And that is not a straightforward challenge. Yeah. Okay? And to be frank, because I have been involved in some conversations with yourself about this, we're just beginning to scratch the surface about what this really means. But however, we probably need to fast-track our conversations to start to come with 4 or 5 key areas in which we could take this forward. And this is not only for services. This is how we do some of the work that we do in-house. As to how we go out there and acquire information, how we do things with respect to suppository of information in the energy business. There are several different ways that we can look at, okay, that has an element of consolidation in it. But I guess I'm just putting up a warning. We have to tread carefully here. Yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, reducing the cost base is absolutely important, and consolidation is definitely a way to go to get that. And I think there are examples of that consolidation that have occurred already in our industry. Some of them in the Point Leases group, the way we operate down there. I don't want to get into some of the details, but that some of that exists, and a lot more could be done. You take what the Energy Chamber has done around Stowe and around Plea, that also is consolidation that drops cost base and improves the efficiency of the... But I kind of want to go back to where Derek was with us, because I have certainly bounced my head with trying to move this ball down the road, and the gentleman opened the floor with, I think, a very good question about how can we do it differently. And Derek is certainly saying, don't look back in the past, to go forward. But if you continue to do the same old thing, it's like madness. You're going nowhere, right? And I feel sometimes as though the industry is at that point of madness, where nothing is seemingly moving forward. So I'm sitting here and I'm testing the audience. maybe some bright ideas exist outside there, or how can we engage the collaboration across all stakeholders differently so that we see Trinidad Inc. going forward, Trinidad Energy Inc. going forward, and how do we make this thing work seamlessly such that we could start to get traction? We're not getting traction. We talk about, well, it's us and them, and at one time it was the downstream against the upstream. When this whole gas thing started, it was them fellas holding back on the gas, they want a higher price. Okay, we've worked past that now and realized, wow, this is not really so. So we're collaborating upstream, downstream. There's something about the government's distance or the government agency's distance from that is not coming to the table that we could move as a collaborative whole. So again, I'm opening it up to the audience. Do you have great ideas around how this collaboration could start to work so that Trinidad Energy Inc. could move forward? That's kind of me sitting here and asking you.
Very good.
Yep.
Phillips Energy. One of our concerns...
Sorry, Shazan, just hold for 1 minute. We have one...
Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yeah, one of our concerns, of course, I listened to the panel quite carefully, but from the service industry, what we have recognized, is particularly in recent times, the panel talked quite a lot about technology and efficiency. However, it is apparent that whenever we try to introduce new technology or do things differently, there's a strong resentment or objection to new technology which could increase the efficiency of the oil and gas industry and the way we extract the oil, the way we extract the gas. But we always come across this objection to technology. In other words, there are so many people in the industry that have been there for quite some time, but they are afraid of the changes and the technology. How we could get past that, because that is one of the issues that is retarding us right now. So it could be a conversation that we have, because even with the larger companies like BP and BG, I prefer to make the reference that they still resent some of the technology where we could assist. So that is one of the obstacles that we have to overcome, because we're talking about solutions here as well. So I would like the panel to elaborate on it a little bit, because your resources that we have to deal with every day, that is where the problem exists as well. Thank you.
I would respond in terms of very quickly. It has not been my experience. However, it is not, if a statement is made, then I have to accept it as being correct. And I would put it back to the audience that for all of you in the service industry, if in my organization, and I'm sure the same holds for others, that if you see a resistance to any sort of technical improvement which will make our business do better, then you call me directly and I will respond to it. But nobody, I've only been back here about 3 months and away too much of it. Nobody has called me so far. So you need to raise the ante.
I certainly will give you a call.
I look forward to that. I understand this was a BG problem.
Not necessarily, but I don't want to.
I was just going to say there's some benefits to the acquisition.
But I could refer to BP as well.
I know, yeah, good. Take on Norman now.
Norman, you want to respond?
You remember my thing about letting him go first? And then No, but I can only echo what Derek's already said, which is I have a very strong interest in getting the best technical expertise, best utilization of technology, and the best cost profiles, sustainable cost profiles for my business. So if there's resistance to that in my company, it's actually working against what my priority and purpose is. So I'd make exactly the same invitation. We need to know. Now, it doesn't mean that we're always going to agree that your assessment is the same as mine, but I want to hear the story and then make the determination. So there is no divergence in interest in getting the right technical expertise and the right technology and the right cost. None whatsoever.
So
we
Mark,
have to have the conversation.
Before I forget, Mark, give that gentleman my telephone number, because you know these days we can't afford business cards.
All right. I think we had a question over on this side. Shazan?
Shazan Ali, QSL Engineering. I think we need to focus in on zeroing rather than talking. We should say clearly to the government what we expect them to do, in what time frame. We should say to the NGC what we expect them to do, and we should attack the petrotrin problem. The whole of South Trinidad depends on petrotrin for work. We should look at the inefficiencies of petrotrin and say exactly what needs to be done and have an action plan on the time. We go around the questions. I know I was talking to some of you on the panel, and because of the positions you hold, you try to phrase it in a way that you don't involve your company. I'm an independent. I said I put my roof over my head so I can see what I want. We need to tackle the problem, and we need to give some directions here. And finally, for the energy services sector, we have been moving the goalposts all the time. We say you need to get STOW, you have to have a corporate governance policy, you have to have a HSEQ policy, and yet when we invite people to court, we're looking for the lowest bid, not the people for the things we want them to put in. So we need to tackle those questions rather than just beat around the bush all the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Shazan. Dax, what time do we go into? We're there now. Okay. Look, I mean, you know, I think there's some important things have been raised. I think there's some things raised here for the Energy Chamber, to be quite honest, you know, and, you know, I certainly will ask Dax to lead us in that conversation. I mean, it goes back to, you know, how do we really engage? It goes to Shazan's point about, you know, we've got to distill things down into some very clear points, you know, and make sure that the people that need to have these conversations are having them. I believe they're going on. I know I have them. I think you guys have them as well. But if it needs to happen in a different way, then that's what we need to do. The bottom line is that we're facing, you know, as you guys said, the perfect storm, you know, and we cannot do business as usual any longer. We've got to find a different way, or else we're going to lose business, you know. My belief, you know, looking around this panel and this room, is that we have the human resource, the capability to work our way through this. And we have the rocks, you know. I think when we bring all of that together, we have solutions that can work, you know. It requires some new action from all of us. Before we close, because I don't want to keep people beyond the time, I would certainly like to, on behalf of all of the folks who are here today, to thank you, the panelists, thank Derek, Charles, Norman, certainly, and Roger, you know, for all that you have contributed to this panel today. And I know what you're going to continue to contribute, because all of us in this thing together, you know, we have to work our way out of it. But I'm convinced we can do that. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank the panel.